Frames. In Desire, a YouTube love story by RocJane. Scene 1. The first meeting. Lena adjusted the angle of the softbox light for the third time, muttering under her breath as it caught the edge of the white brick wall instead of the wooden backdrop she'd envisioned. This shoot had to be perfect. Her subscriber count had plateaued for weeks, and this collaboration, the one she'd been manifesting for nearly a year, could change everything. She smoothed her black satin blouse over her jeans, fingers trembling in the quiet hum of her loft studio. The space smelled faintly of eucalyptus and espresso, and the golden hour sun spilled across the floorboards like molten glass. Every detail was curated for the lens, minimalist, warm, inviting. The knock came low, deliberate. Her pulse stuttered. When Lena opened the door, the world narrowed to the man standing on the threshold. 𝐿𝐴𝐵𝐻. She'd seen his work, those sweeping drone shots of deserts and seas, the kind of cinematic beauty that made you ache, but nothing had prepared her for the man himself. Tall, broad-shouldered, sun-kissed skin, dark hair tousled just enough to look effortless. A quiet confidence radiated from him, like he carried entire landscapes inside his bones. Lena? His voice was a low current, warm and steady, and for a second, she forgot how to form words. Yeah, she smiled, professional and polished, though her heart was a riot. Come in. Thanks for being here. He stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the space, walls lined with art prints, the neat chaos of camera gear, the notes pinned above her desk. When his eyes landed on her, they lingered a fraction too long, and something inside her tightened. Nice setup, he said, dropping his equipment case by the couch. Lighting's decent, but you're a little off-axis. Her brows lifted. Oh? And you always critique your clients before saying hello? Only when they're about to film with shadows on their jawline. A flicker of a smile curved his mouth, quick and devastating. Lena laughed, light and sharp, masking the sudden heat crawling up her neck. Guess I'm in good hands then. Guess you are. The air between them shifted, subtle but undeniable. She felt it when he crossed to the light stand, his arm brushing hers as he adjusted the angle with practiced ease. The scent of him, clean cedar and rain, wrapped around her, and her breath hitched before she could stop it. Better, he murmured, stepping back to assess his work. His gaze flicked to her again, and for one reckless second, it felt like he wasn't looking at the setup at all. Lena forced a grin, leaning into the tease. Do you always boss your videographers around? Only the handsome ones, she said, before she could stop herself, and instantly wished for a rewind button. Evan's smile deepened, slow and deliberate, like sunrise cresting the horizon. Good to know, he said, voice low enough to feel rather than hear. For a moment, silence stretched, thick, humming, full of things neither of them would name. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping the thread. He checked it, thumb scrolling once before sliding it away. Ready when you are, he said, lifting his camera, the quiet intensity in his eyes like a lens pulling her into focus. And just like that, the game began. Scene 2. The first shoot, Saturday morning, arrived drenched in sunlight and the promise of possibility. The city buzzed beyond Lena's windshield, a collage of honking cabs, street vendors, and the rhythmic clatter of cafe cups. She pulled into the curb by the open-air market, nerves coiling tight in her stomach. Not from the crowd, but from the man waiting by the entrance, camera slung over his shoulder like an extension of his body. Evan. He was leaning against a wrought iron post, casual in a gray Henley and dark jeans that clung just right, his sunglasses tucked into the neckline. When his eyes found her through the flow of pedestrians, he straightened, a flicker of something warm flashing across his face before it smoothed into that easy, measured calm she was quickly learning to recognize. Lena slipped out of the car, camera bag in hand, heart pounding far louder than the street noise. "Hope you're ready to make me look like I actually know what I'm doing," she teased, adjusting the strap on her shoulder as she approached. Evan's mouth curved, slow and sure. "You don't need me for that." The words hit her like heat, unexpected and disarming. She laughed it off, focusing on the vendors setting up stalls fragrant with spices and citrus, the bright awnings fluttering in the late morning breeze. "Okay," she said, clearing her throat. "Goal is day in the city. Fun, casual, spontaneous." He lifted the camera, his hands steady, his gaze assessing in that quiet, deliberate way that made her feel as though he was memorizing more than angles. "Spontaneous," he repeated, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "You mean scripted spontaneity?" She shot him a look over her shoulder. "Hey, it takes work to look effortless." He chuckled, a low, rich sound that curled through her like smoke. And then they were moving, weaving into the market's maze of color and sound. The first hour blurred in a whirl of vibrant stalls and candid laughter. Evan filmed her reaching for bright bundles of flowers, tilting her face to inhale their perfume. He caught her biting into a slice of mango, juice glossing her lips. Every time she glanced at the lens, heat pricked her skin, because she felt him behind it, felt the weight of his attention like a hand on her back. At one point, she ducked beneath a string of paper lanterns, the light staining her skin in crimson and gold. When she straightened, he was closer than she'd realized, his arm brushing hers as he adjusted his angle. "Hold still," he murmured, his breath grazing her temple, sending a shiver racing through her. The shutter clicked, again and again, the sound syncing with her heartbeat. "Perfect," he said finally, lowering the camera, but his voice... God, his voice sounded like more than photography. Lena turned away too quickly, pretending to examine a rack of handmade scarves. Her fingers trembled on the silk, the fabric sliding like water through her grip. "Get it together," she scolded herself. This was work, a collaboration, not a slow-motion reel of every forbidden thought she'd sworn she'd never entertain on set. "Hungry?" His question snapped her back, and she looked up to find him watching her with that quiet intensity that made air feel too heavy in her lungs. "Starving," she said, forcing a grin. They ended up perched on a weathered bench, with steaming paper trays balanced between them, dumplings glistening with soy, skewers slick with glaze. The city roared around them, but in the small orbit of that bench, the world felt smaller, quieter. Evan lifted a skewer, offering it across the space. "Try this." She leaned in, her lips closing over the tender meat as his fingers lingered just a breath too long on the stick. Heat spiked low in her belly, sharp and sweet. "Good?" he asked, his voice edged with something that didn't sound like casual curiosity. "Dangerously," she murmured, her tongue flicking against the taste, her pulse kicking when his eyes followed the motion. He looked away first, scanning the crowd, but not before she caught it, the shadow of want crossing his face like a cloud skimming the sun. By the time they wrapped, the sun had begun its slow descent, gilding the city in honey and flame. Lena gathered her things with mechanical precision, trying not to replay every stolen glance, every accidental brush of skin. Beside her, Evan packed his gear, movements fluid, practiced, but there was a tension in his shoulders she hadn't seen before, something coiled, restrained. "You good?" she asked lightly, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "Fine," he said, but his voice was low, a little rough. Then his gaze slid to hers, holding it for a beat too long. "You?" She swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "Yeah, great." It wasn't a lie, not exactly. But as they walked back through the thinning crowd, the air thick with the scent of rain about to fall, Lena wondered how long they could keep pretending this was just about cameras and content, when every frame felt like a confession. Neither of them could speak aloud. The drive back was a blur of headlights and silence, the kind that thrummed with everything unsaid. When he pulled up in front of her building, she hesitated with her hand on the door, the weight of his gaze burning like a brand on her skin. "Thanks for today," she said finally, her voice too soft, too careful. "Thank you," he returned, and the way he said it, low, threaded with something that sounded like hunger, made her stomach twist. For a second, neither moved. Then Lena forced herself to open the door, to step out into the dusky street, before she did something reckless, like lean across the console and taste the heat simmering in his eyes. As she climbed the stairs to her loft, the echo of that almost lingered like a touch she couldn't shake. Scene 3. Late Night Edit. The city was deep in its midnight rhythm by the time Lena stepped out of the elevator and into Evan's editing studio. The space smelled faintly of coffee and ozone, dim pools of light spilling from desk lamps onto sleek black monitors. Outside, rain slicked the streets, neon bleeding into puddles like watercolor. She smoothed her jacket, heart tapping an unsteady beat. This was supposed to be work, footage review, planning the next shoot. But her pulse didn't know the difference between professional and something far more dangerous. "Hey," Evan said without turning, his voice low, warm, curling around her like smoke. He was bent over his desk, the glow of the screen painting his profile in sharp planes and shadows. When he finally looked up, the light caught his eyes, dark, liquid, pulling her in. "Hey," she echoed, setting her bag down with fingers that felt clumsy. He gestured to the chair beside him. "You ready to see magic?" "Ready to see what you've got," she teased, but her voice came out softer than intended. She sat, and suddenly, the world shrank to the quiet hum of hard drives and the subtle heat radiating from his body. He leaned in, a subtle shift, and the air between them throbbed with awareness. The first clips rolled, bright bursts of color, her smile frozen in mid-laugh, the sway of lanterns above her head. His hands moved over the keyboard, precise, confident, pulling rhythm from raw footage. But what struck her wasn't the edit. It was the way his gaze flicked, quick, almost guilty, from the screen to her reflection in the monitor. "You make this easy," he murmured, almost to himself. "What?" She turned, catching the faintest curve of his mouth. "Most people, they perform for the camera. You just exist, and the frame loves you for it." Heat climbed her throat. "Careful," she said lightly. "That almost sounds like flirting." He met her eyes then, dark, steady, unflinching, and the tease dissolved like sugar in rain. "Maybe it is," he said quietly. Her breath stuttered. The room seemed to tilt, the hum of machines fading to the wild drumbeat of her pulse. Evan looked away first, dragging the playhead across the timeline. The screen bloomed with color, her laughing in slow motion, sunlight spilling like liquid gold through her hair, eyes alight with something that felt unguarded. Lena stared, throat tightening. She remembered that moment, biting into a slice of mango, sticky fingers, wind lifting the hem of her blouse. It had felt ordinary, but in his lens, it was poetry. "You," she faltered, her voice raw. "You make it look like more than it was." His hand stilled on the mouse. "It was more," he said, and the weight in his voice pinned her breath. She turned slowly, the leather chair creaking under her. He was closer now, close enough that she could see the faint stubble darkening his jaw, the curve of his mouth that had haunted her since the market. Evan! His name was a whisper, but it trembled like a secret begging to break. For one suspended beat, neither moved. Then his hand lifted, almost tentative, fingers grazing her cheek like a question. Lena's breath caught, her skin sparking under the feather-light touch. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his knuckles brushing her jaw, and it was nothing, just a simple gesture. But her body responded like a struck chord, vibrating with want. The silence stretched, taut and humming. His gaze dropped to her mouth, lingered, then flicked back to her eyes with a heat that made her dizzy. She felt herself leaning, just enough to feel the ghost of his breath on her lips, warm and tasting faintly of coffee. The space between them was a heartbeat, a breath, a choice, and she broke it. With a laugh that sounded brittle to her own ears, Lena leaned back, forcing air into her lungs. "Wow," she said brightly, too brightly. "Guess you really do know your way around an edit." The flash of disappointment in his eyes was gone almost before it appeared, smoothed into that calm she was beginning to hate. He smiled, polite, distant, and reached for the keyboard again. "Guess so," he said, his voice even, but his hands lingered in his lap for a fraction longer, curling into fists before they moved. The rest of the review passed in a blur of color and noise she barely absorbed. Her mind replayed that moment on a loop, the weight of his gaze, the whisper of his fingers on her skin. The almost that hung between them like smoke. When she finally stood to leave, her knees felt unsteady. She thanked him, her words stumbling, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air was thick, the street lamps haloed in mist. Lena walked fast, her breath sharp, her body aching with something she couldn't name, something she wasn't sure she wanted to tame. Behind her, in that dim studio pulsing with unfinished edits, a man sat in silence, staring at the frame frozen on his screen. Her face, laughing, luminous, framed in a way that wasn't about content or clicks. It was about her. It had always been about her. Scene 4. A challenge from the sponsor. The conference room smelled faintly of burnt espresso and cold ambition. Lena sat at the polished table, her phone clenched so tightly her knuckles ached, trying to keep her smile pinned in place. Across from her, a brand representative in a razor-sharp blazer clicked through slides that might as well have been handcuffs. "So we'd like to pivot the creative direction," the woman said, her tone crisp, final. "Less personal narrative, more focus on the product." Lena's stomach dropped. Personal narrative was the whole point. Her channel wasn't just a collection of pretty frames, it was her voice, her vision. Strip that away, and she was just another glossy face selling things she didn't believe in. "I appreciate the feedback," Lena began, forcing calm into her voice. "But my audience connects because it feels authentic. If we make this about hard selling..." The rep cut her off with a smile sharp enough to draw blood. "Authenticity is great, but the client is paying for impressions. The sooner you adapt, the better for everyone." Heat crawled up Lena's neck, her pulse a roar in her ears. She opened her mouth, but another voice slid into the space, low and steady, cutting through the tension like a blade. "That's not what you hired her for," Evan said. Lena turned, startled. He'd been quiet until now, leaning back in his chair like a man immune to boardroom politics. But now he was leaning forward, forearms braced on the table, his gaze locked on the rep with a calm intensity that vibrated with authority. "You brought her on because people trust her," he continued, his voice even but edged with steel. "You try to script that, you lose the audience, you lose the campaign, so maybe trust the person who knows them best." Silence crashed over the room. The rep blinked, her composure faltering for a fraction of a second before she pasted on another brittle smile. "We'll revisit the notes," she said, closing her laptop with a snap. Meeting adjourned. Lena didn't breathe until they were in the hallway, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing above like a swarm of restless bees. She stopped, turning to him, words tangling in her throat. "You didn't have to," she started. "Yes, I did." His voice was low, certain, and when his eyes met hers, it was like the room tilted. For a moment, neither moved. The air between them pulsed, charged with something deeper than gratitude, hotter than frustration. She wanted to tell him what it meant, that someone had chosen her side without hesitation. But all that came out was a whisper. "Thank you." Evan's gaze lingered, dark and steady, a question and a promise all at once. His mouth curved, slow, devastating. "Always," he said. And it wasn't just a word, it was a vow. Scene 5. The rainstorm shoot. The botanical garden glowed with late afternoon light, glass panels arching high like a cathedral dome. Rows of orchids shimmered in soft pinks and purples, their petals heavy with dew, while thunder rumbled far off, a warning wrapped in velvet. "Golden hour's going to be perfect in here," Lena said, adjusting the lapel of her blazer as her heels clicked along the stone path. Evan barely glanced at the orchids, his camera lifted, gaze narrowing through the lens. "It's perfect now," he murmured. The words hummed low, almost intimate, and when his eyes flicked to hers, not the flowers, not the light, her, heat spilled under her skin. Then, the first raindrops fell, tiny, cool pinpricks. "Seriously?" Lena laughed, tipping her face toward the ceiling just as the sky split open. A downpour hammered the glass overhead, water sluicing down the panes in wild rivers. Lena shrieked when a cold splash hit her shoulder, laughing as she tried to shield her camera bag. "Come on," Evan called, already moving, hand closing around hers before she could react. His grip was strong, warm, and that single touch sent a jolt racing up her arm. He tugged her down a narrow path, past dripping ferns and vines heavy with water, until they reached the pavilion, a glass room cocooned in rain. Lena collapsed against a railing, breathless. Her blazer clung like silk, droplets sliding from her hair down the curve of her neck. She tried to smooth it, fingers trembling, but the strands curled rebelliously around her face. Evan stood a few feet away, rain-slicked curls plastered to his forehead, his Henley molded to his chest. Water tracked down his jaw, caught in the hollow of his throat, and for a moment, she couldn't look away. "You're soaked," he said softly, voice husky, and the sound of it was worse than the storm, thick and charged, like something dangerous. "So are you." The laugh slipped out, thin and shaky. He stepped closer, slow, deliberate, until the scent of rain and cedar wrapped around her. His hand lifted, not rough, not hurried, just reverent. Fingers brushed her cheek, tucking a wet strand of hair behind her ear, and the touch was so gentle it ached. Lena forgot how to breathe. "You know," he murmured, his voice barely above the storm's hiss, "I've been filming you for years without a camera." Her lips parted, soundless. "What?" "Every laugh, every time you tilt your head like that." His fingers hovered near her jaw, grazing the edge of her pulse. "I don't need a lens to frame you, Lena. You're already burned into me." The words hit her like heat. The rain outside became a blur, her body thrumming with a wild, reckless beat. She leaned in without meaning to, just enough to feel the warmth of his breath, the whisper of something forbidden and inevitable hovering between them. And then he stopped. A shudder rippled through him, his hand curling into a fist before it fell to his side. He stepped back a fraction, like distance was the only thread holding him together. "Storm's not letting up," he said roughly, his voice scraped raw. "We should wait it out." "Yeah," she whispered, but her body screamed against it, every nerve lit like a fuse. They stood there in silence, inches apart, the rain pounding its wild rhythm all around them. Neither spoke, neither moved, but both knew. The line between them had thinned to nothing, and it was only a matter of time before it broke. Scene 6. The Rift. By the next morning, the storm was a memory, washed clean from the streets but clinging to Lena like a ghost. She woke with the sound of rain still in her bones, the heat of his words echoing through her like an aftershock. "I've been filming you for years without a camera." She replayed it on a loop while editing clips from the garden, fingers trembling over the keyboard. Every frame of her on-screen seemed sharper, heavier with meaning, like she could see it now, the way he looked at her through the lens. And yet, nothing had happened. Not really. She'd gone to bed wet, shivering, and alone. By the time their next shoot rolled around, Lena had locked those thoughts behind a steel door. Work first. Always work first. She repeated it like a prayer as she walked into the loft and found Evan already there, leaning against the window with sunlight gilding the edges of his hair. "Morning," he said, and it was just a word, casual, polite, but it slid over her skin like silk, unraveling the distance she'd tried to build. "Morning," she echoed, forcing brightness into her voice. They didn't talk about the storm, or the way his fingers had lingered on her skin like a secret. They talked about shot lists, lighting, brand expectations. Every syllable was a fence she hammered into the ground between them. But fences can't stop what you don't see coming. Halfway through setting up, Lena's phone buzzed. A text from a mutual friend in the production circle, one she hadn't heard from in months. Congrats on working with Evan. Crazy that he turned down the Bali project for this. Her brows knit. Bali project? She scrolled, pulse spiking as details spilled across the screen. A massive travel campaign, multi-week shoot, huge paycheck, and he'd walked away from it. For this, for her? Number. That didn't make sense. Her chest tightened with something sharp and sour. What if it wasn't about her? What if it was because she was too difficult, too demanding with her creative vision, too wrapped up in her authenticity to bend? What if working with her had cost him something that mattered? By the time Evan called her name, she had her answer ready, the only one that felt safe. Distance. "Ready?" he asked, lifting the camera, a faint crease etching his brow when he caught her expression. "Yeah." She smiled, brittle as glass. "Let's just keep this one simple." His eyes lingered, searching, but she turned before he could read what was breaking open inside her. The rest of the shoot was smooth, professional, hollow. They hit every mark, every angle. They laughed, on cue, like actors who'd rehearsed too long. But the thread that had pulled tight between them since day one? She severed it clean, even when it burned in her fingers like rope. When he asked if she wanted to review footage later, she lied with a sweetness that scraped her throat raw. Maybe another time. And when he said okay, quiet, careful, like he was stepping back from something fragile, she almost turned around, almost told him everything. Instead, she walked away, her heart a raw wound, her pulse echoing with the memory of rain and a confession she didn't know how to trust. Scene 7. The truth comes out. The final shoot wrapped just as the city's skyline melted into gold. Warm light spilled across the rooftop, glinting off glass towers and painting Lena in shades of fire and honey. It should have felt triumphant. The last frame captured, the campaign nearly complete. But all she felt was hollow. She packed her gear with quick, precise motions, like speed could drown the ache pressing against her ribs. Evan hadn't said much all day. Neither had she. Silence had become their script. Lena. His voice slid through the dusk like a current, pulling her still. She didn't turn. Yeah? Look at me. Something in his tone, low, threaded with iron, and something else, something raw, rooted her feet to the ground. Slowly, she turned. He stood a few feet away, the wind teasing his hair, his camera slung against his back like an afterthought. But his eyes... God, his eyes weren't calm anymore. They burned. "You've been different," he said. "Since the garden. Since that night." She forced a laugh, brittle as glass. "You're imagining things. Don't do that." His voice cracked sharp, then softened, almost breaking. "Don't lie to me." Her throat worked, but no words came. Evan stepped closer, his jaw tight, every line of him coiled like a man at the edge of something he couldn't take back. "You think I don't notice when you shut down? When you pull so far away, I can't even feel you in the room?" Her nails bit crescents into her palms. Maybe that's for the best. His breath hitched, sharp and uneven, like her words had cut deeper than she meant them to. Then, quieter. "Is that what you really want?" She opened her mouth. "Yes, it's safer. Yes, this can't happen." But the truth clawed past her defenses before she could cage it. "I heard about Bali," she whispered. Evan stilled, confusion flickering before comprehension slammed into his face. "Bali," he repeated, like the word tasted like ash. "You think I regret turning that down? You don't?" Her voice cracked on the edge of disbelief. "It was huge, Evan. And you. God, I thought that you cost me something," he finished, raw and rough. "That working with you ruined my shot." Her silence was answer enough. He exhaled hard, dragging a hand through his hair, then closed the last steps between them until the world narrowed to heat and sky and the pounding in her ears. His eyes locked on hers, fierce and unflinching. "I turned it down because it would have taken me away from this, from you." His voice broke like a storm finally letting go. "And there isn't a paycheck on the planet worth that." Lena's heart slammed so hard she swore it bruised her ribs. The wind whipped strands of hair across her face, and when he reached to tuck them back, his fingers shook, just barely, but enough to undo her completely. She didn't move. Couldn't. Because in his eyes, there was no distance, no doubt, just the truth she'd been starving for. And with that, every wall she'd built came crashing down. Scene 8. The moment. The wind swept across the rooftop, tugging at Lena's hair, scattering the last rays of sun like molten coins across the skyline. The city below shimmered, glass towers catching fire in the dusk, lights winking awake one by one, as if the whole world was holding its breath with her. Evan didn't move. Neither did she. They stood there in the charged quiet, his words still echoing in the air between them. "I turned it down because it would have taken me away from this. From you." Her chest ached with the weight of it, truth heavy and shattering, sliding through every brittle wall she'd built. She wanted to speak, to tell him how wrong she'd been, how every step away from him had felt like tearing out her own pulse. But all that came out was a whisper, barely audible over the wind. "Evan?" He closed the space in 2 strides. Not hurried, not reckless, just inevitable, like the tide swallowing the shore. And then his hand was on her cheek, warm and firm, tilting her face up to his. For one suspended second, the world narrowed to that touch. The rough scrape of his thumb against her skin. The smell of rain still clinging to his shirt, mingling with the faint, clean scent of him. Soap, cedar, something darker. His breath hit hers, uneven, tasting of coffee and unsaid things. And then he kissed her. It wasn't soft. It wasn't tentative. It was everything they'd both been holding back, breaking loose in a rush that stole the air from her lungs. His mouth claimed hers with a hunger that left her trembling, her fingers fisting in his shirt like she needed to anchor herself to something solid, something real. Evan groaned into the kiss, low, rough, like the sound had been trapped in his chest for too long. And that was her undoing. She melted against him, the fight bleeding out of her as his arms locked around her waist, hauling her closer until there was no space left to hide. The city disappeared. Time unraveled. There was only heat and hands, and the wild, dizzying truth that nothing, no brand deal, no fear, no past, could burn this out of her. When he finally tore his mouth from hers, it was only to trail it along her jaw, the edge of her throat, each kiss a brand that seared through the chill of the evening air. Her breath shattered on a gasp, her head tipping back as his lips found the hollow just beneath her ear. "God, Lena," he rasped against her skin, voice shredded with need. "Do you have any idea what you do to me?" She wanted to laugh, to answer, but the sound dissolved into a whimper when his teeth grazed lightly, teasing, and her knees nearly gave out. She clutched at his shoulders, dragging him back to her mouth, kissing him harder, deeper, until the world tilted, and the only thing that mattered was the taste of him, the feel of him, the way he kissed like a man starved and saved in the same breath. He walked her backward until her spine brushed the cool metal railing, and even that felt like fire compared to the heat rolling off him. One of his hands slid up her back, fingers tangling in her damp hair, tilting her head to take more, take everything. The kiss slowed, softened, but it didn't lose its intensity. It shifted, less frenzy, more reverence. A worship whispered through every press of his lips, every sigh that trembled out of him like prayer. When they finally broke apart, foreheads resting together, both gasping like they'd run for miles, the city had melted into a galaxy of lights, stars above, stars below, and them caught in the in-between. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking on the words, "for pulling away, for thinking." "Don't." His thumb brushed her mouth, silencing her, his eyes dark and unyielding. "Don't apologize for being careful. I should have said something sooner. Should have told you." "You just did," she breathed, her lips curving against his touch. Loud and clear. That earned a laugh, soft, shaky, but real, and it wrapped around her like warmth against the night chill. He kissed her again, gentle this time, a lingering promise, more than a demand, and when he pulled back, his gaze held hers steady. "What happens now?" she asked, the question trembling like a leaf in the wind. Evan smiled, slow, devastating. "Now?" His forehead brushed hers, his voice sinking low. "Now we make something that'll make the whole damn world jealous." Epilogue. 3 weeks later, the video dropped. Within hours, it exploded. Millions of views, thousands of comments, hashtags blooming like wildfire across every platform. Most cinematic collab ever. Chemistry? I can feel it through the screen. Are they dating? Or am I just delusional? Lena scrolled through them in bed, laughter bubbling up, tangled in sheets that still smelled like him. She glanced at the man stretched out beside her, shirtless, laptop balanced on his knees as he edited something new, his hair a tousled mess that made her fingers itch to ruin it further. "What's the verdict?" he asked, without looking up, voice warm and lazy. "They think we're together," she teased, tossing the phone aside. That earned her a glance, sharp and molten, before he reached over and dragged her onto his lap like gravity had nothing on him. "They think right," he murmured against her mouth, and the kiss tasted like coffee, sunrise, and a promise she didn't need to hear to believe. When they finally broke apart, breathless and grinning, Lena rested her head against his shoulder, staring at the screen where her face glowed in golden light. The shot he'd fought for. The one that started everything. She used to think the camera was his way of capturing the world. Now she knew. It had always been her he'd been framing. The end